Welcome to the Time for Heroes podcast.
Hi there, I'm Jason from Battle, and you're listening to the Time for Heroes podcast.
Jason from Battle, brilliant band, short-lived, but on the return. You got your first gig in 19 years coming up on the 8th of May in London's Water Rats, alongside the Mardous and Dustin's bar Mitzah. So we're going to talk about that at some point. Hopefully the boys are going to jump in as well and have a wee chat about it. But what I like to do, Jason, is get right back to the start. What was life like for a young Jason growing up, and how did that shape you into band life?
That's a good question, Martin, because sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday, like when I was 15 or 16, I used to look at people who were even in their late 20s, and I'd think I can't imagine being that old. It just seems so old. You must be so removed from what it's like to just have to go to school and you're trying to fight. There's all these things you're kind of rebelling against because you've got all these hormones racing around you. So I think at the very beginning, music for me, and it's going to sound a bit cliche, but was always an escape, because I couldn't drive. I was too young to be able to drive a car. And although I was born, bred, based in London, when you're a kid, it doesn't matter where you're from. You just want to leave the place you're from, because your home feels like a prison, because it's all about rules. You're going to school and you can't stay out late and things like that. So music was the only way I could just be as loud as I wanted to be and just make a noise. So all those early bands that I was in, were just thrash punk bands. They weren't really very musical. They were just hardcore, be as loud as you can, smash things up. And we've got some early recordings from really early on, where I'm just screaming into mics and things, just having a good time of it. Basically, it was primal scream therapy. So that's what it was like. And then kind of very quickly, it sort of it was because I was sort of, because I grew up in the 90s, surrounded by these amazing bands, obviously namely Oasis and Blur and Pub, all those Britpop bands, and somewhere between 96 and 2001, it's between the height of Britpop and the end of Britpop, basically, you've got the Strokes. And when I look back on that period and I think about, in 5 years, you had the height of Britpop, and then you had the beginning of the Strokes, and is this it? That's no time at all. So I think everything was moving so quickly. So if you were making music back then, every couple of years there was just something amazing that kind of came along. And I just remember being in Jamie's bedroom. We were playing guitar, and we were wow, this year we've had The Fat of the Land this was in 1997. The Fat of the Land by the Prodigy came out. Urban Hymns by The Verve. You Here Now by Oasis came out, which I actually thought was quite a good album. And then, of course, OK Computer. That was just 4 albums of loads. I think Songs from the City, by PJ Harvey, that was out as well that year. It was just looking back, it was crazy. So basically, you either played football or you're in a band. I think that's about it, because computer games were rubbish. So nobody I knew was really gaming. It was just football or music.
Mm-hmm. And so, touching on football then, were you into football? And if so, what football team?
Do you know what? There wasn't... I had a brief flirtation with Millwall, just because I'm really into local things. I like stuff that's just close to home. But Millwall is just too rowdy. It was just people going there to fight. So I had to kind of give that up. And to be honest, music was an obsession from the age of 7, really. I was just obsessed with how it worked. I was obsessed with the idea of the 7-inch single, what that meant, how you could do so much with 3 minutes, and how you could be that influential. Because you get influential movies, but they're 3 hours long, or a book which might take you 3 days to read if you read it non-stop. But in 3 minutes, you could change someone's entire worldview. And it happened to me a lot. I'd hear other people's music, and it would completely change the way I felt about who I was going to be. Again, a bit of a cliche, but the first time I ever heard, I Want to Be Adored by the Stone Roses, I remember everything about it. I remember driving across, it was Tower Bridge, sun was shining, I was with my cousin, and he was you've got to hear this band called the Stone Roses. And I was yeah, I think I've heard someone mention that band before. And I was a kid, and he played the album from start to finish, and of course the first track is I Want to Be Adored. And from the opening strains of I Want to Be Adored, I was oh, my whole life has just changed. I know exactly what clothes I want to buy, and I kind of wanted to become Mancunian in that moment, basically. It was just, it was so powerful. And that was 3 minutes of music. I don't think there's anything else out there that does that to people.
Just as we mentioned that, here's Ross. Ross is just going to join us. We'll let him in, see how he is.
Hi,
Ross.
Hi, Martin. How are you doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine, yeah. So obviously I've got Jason on. We're doing the
Hi.
full Time for Heroes podcast with Jason, but I thought I'd just get your cell phone and Dave, who's just joining now, just for a wee 5 minutes and just a wee bit about this up and coming gig. Obviously for yourself, Ross, I mean, you've done this nostalgia thing just last year. You did the gig with the Cribs and the Paddingtons. So how does it feel kind of getting back on with these boys?
Yeah, amazing. Really, really great. I can't wait, actually. Really, really cool. 'Cause I feel like brothers with the same cause, really. Yeah, it's going to be great. Can't wait.
Mhm. And this is the 8th of May at the Water Rats as well, which is obviously a iconic London venue. Obviously, the big part of the Oasis stories. What does the Water Rats hold for your free bands?
I think speaking for myself, it was like even growing up as a teenager, like sort of living in Scotland, going to London. That was certainly one of the places that was on the map to play in London, and I certainly did in other bands. I was sort of playing the Water Rats to literally one man and his dog, but it was sort of the Water Rats and the Dublin Castle were the ones that you kind of quite significant for up and coming bands. But since then, yeah, sort of recognised the Water Rats sort of history as being a sort of vital place to play in London, and can't wait to get back there. Yeah.
Dave, so we're talking about the Water Rats here. What sort of memories have you got about the Water Rats for back in the day?
I think I remember the first time we played the Water Rats was, I think it was either Lamac or John Kennedy had a night at the Water Rats, and the Water Rats, it used to be a proper shithole. But like in a good way, in a way that the Barfly was like a shithole.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing, Water Rats was a weird one because it was somewhere you'd only go if you were playing or if you were going to see a band there. Do you know what I mean? Because it
Yeah.
wasn't in Camden. Like Barfly, I went through a stage of just going to the Barfly every week, probably multiple times, because it was open till like 3 a.m. There was a fucking off license next door to it. Fucking, that was also open till 3 a.m. This is when I was back on my back when I would like, I don't know, I was convinced that I'd only ever spend £10 on a night out, but I I was probably spending more than £10, but uh yeah,
You'd be struggling to have a good night out on £10 down in London anyway.
Oh man, like, I mean, you couldn't, like, you could barely buy a beer in Camden for a tenner now. But yeah, like Water Rats, and that was the great thing. There were these like dingy venues that, like, I don't want to insult Ross because he was the fucking maitre d' or whatever you call it. He was the person that welcomes you and gets you sandwiches. Yeah, no, it was a shithole, but like in a good way. And you can't really call somewhere a shithole and then say, oh no, but in a good way. But it was. I know there were like certain venues, like in Glasgow, I can't remember the names of them, but you'd go into them and you'd look around and go, yeah, like,
Yeah.
this is gonna be decent. And then there's like, you'd also, I remember once we were playing like Birmingham on tour, and you walked into a venue and it was built into a shopping centre, and you were just like, no, it's all a bit too clean.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, yeah, I've always had like a real soft spot for Water Rats because the sound there is like, it's like I'm not too great on, well, I don't really understand like the physics of the way kind of sound travels around the room or anything, but it's like kind of, it's the right shape. Like, do you know what I mean? In the same way
Yeah.
that the barfly in Camden was just like the perfect shape. And that was completely by accident, because that was just, you can tell that was just like the upstairs room at a pub, but it was, you play the barfly and it would always sound amazing. You play the water rats and it would always sound amazing. Well, I mean, yeah.
So after all these years, I'm going to bring Ross back in. Ross, obviously you said that you've been recording the day, so what's these new tunes that you're recording?
Yeah, I just walked in. It's been a bit of a weekend, so I'm a bit all over the place, and I'm cracking into a pint of Guinness. It's yes, sorry, I don't know where I'm at. Yeah, we've
So
sort of session 2 of new tunes. We've been in the studio for that. We're doing sort of 3 or 4 days at a time, and so we've got
mhm.
I think half an album ish done now.
So I guess what
Very
I'm saying
exciting.
then, obviously that this gig is just under 3 weeks away. So will there be any of these new tunes getting played live at the Water Vats?
From us, yeah, definitely, yeah. Maybe more than we'd normally do. Probably certainly sort of 4 or maybe 5. But we're sort of sneaking them out onto SoundCloud so that people can kind of have a listen to them, even though we're not putting them out for a while yet. So hopefully that'll be appreciated.
Obviously, first gig back in 19 years. Have you played on the same bill as the Mardous and Dustins before? And if so, how easily are you gonna kind of slip back into this band thing after that long out?
Yeah, it's a good question because I mean, so we played. Don't think we played with Ross before, but we definitely played with Dave at least once. Back then, those sorts of early shows, they were closer to the kind of like our more punky beginning. So like really sweaty, kind of like the sort of like toilet circuit gigs, which I personally always love. And I totally agree with Dave about when venue sizes are just the right size where the sound coming off the amps on stage mixed a little bit with what's mic'd up gives you the sort of perfect level to match against the drums. So those are definitely like my favourite shows when you get to around no more than like 300-400. So getting back into it has been like a real reminder of like when we were like an actual like band in a garage, or we used to rehearse in an underground bank vault. So it's been like your muscle memory just does kick back in. You can't remember all the chord positions initially, but it's weird how it is like riding a bike. And like, I've not played in a band in that long. I've made a lot of music with other people and played done a lot of different things. I've always stayed in music, but I've not played in a band, and I wasn't sure what it was going to feel like. But it was like just like hand in glove, really. Because I think I've been doing it from such an like literally from the age of like 11, playing in bands. It's now doing it. It's almost like it's like I tried to give it up, but it was so deep in me that I just couldn't. I tried for like 20 years to not do it. I tried to almost quit it, but it just wasn't possible. And then I go back to it, and it's the most familiar thing ever. It just feels so normal doing it. I didn't think it would be like that, to be honest.
It's like crystal meth.
Exactly like that, yeah.
So I know to keep you too long, Dave and Ross. So Dave, just kind of before I chuck these off, just in a few words, kind of sell the gig for us.
Okay, hold on. Let me think. I'm not a very good salesman, but this is probably going to be the best collection of bands playing on one occasion since Live Aid.
Brilliant.
And unfortunately, because we got to pay venue costs and stuff, we can't really give any of it to Africa. But it would probably take a lot of research, because you just end up giving it to the wrong people, and before you know it, you've funded some kind of minor genocide in, I don't know, Burkina Faso or something. But you can buy tickets. We've all got links on our Instagram page. So buy tickets in advance. Don't be one of these people who turns up. You will be able to buy tickets on the door, but it'll be cash, and don't turn up with a debit card and try and pay with that. Well, I mean, you probably can actually. I don't know. Just turn up and and bring at least £15 with you, and make sure you've eaten a hearty meal before you come. And yeah,
Brilliant.
yeah.
Brilliant. That's a hard sell for Dave for Dustins. Ross, to yourself, man, some final words about the guy.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this happened at Live Aid, but if you want me to make you sandwiches, if you haven't had a meal, I'll be happy to do that. So come along. I'll make a mean tuna paste sandwich with cucumber. I'm happy to take orders on those, but I need them a week in advance for sure. No, but on a serious point, there's been a bit of quite a revival. It sounds really obnoxious, but with the real deal, like we were playing in London around that time, and it's going to be great to have 3 bands from that era playing on the same bill again. I'm really excited about that scene, just sort of celebrating their roots and coming alive again. It's going to be great. I can't wait. Honestly, it's going to be great.
Brilliant. And one last thing, Ross. So I've seen this Baby Shambles teasing a Margate gig, so I might take you up on your offer. I know the last time I had you on, you said if we played down in Margate, you'd put me up in your house. If the dates are right, then I might be giving you a wee phone call. Anyway, I can't hear you. Anyway, that'll do us anyway, Ross, Dave, man, thank you very much for coming on. Yeah, I'm going to chuck these off now anyway, Dave.
Cheers, Martin. Good to see you, boys.
Me and Jason will continue. Thank you very
Jason.
much,
Cheers.
Ross.
Bye.
So the band kind of, like you and Jamie, met at school.
That's right.
And then for what I'm led to believe, he's went to uni with the sole intention of starting a band.
Yeah, that was the only way we were going to meet people, because, in the days before social media, like, you didn't really know who you had around you. And, like, that's why I really feel for people who weren't. It must have been even harder if you weren't from London, I assume, because when you're looking everyone plays guitar, but you can't find, drummers are like trying to find like hen's teeth or something, do you know what I mean? It's same with bassists. So we were like getting stuck trying to find people because everyone just wants to play lead guitar. And then we were like, where are we going to go? We need to go somewhere that's not too far, and somewhere that's got a known like reputation for having bands and things. And so we found out that Canterbury, I visited a whole bunch of universities, and it turned out that when we went to Canterbury, because one of our mates in the year above, he was a musician too, we'd go and stay with him when we were in the final year of school, when he was in his first year at uni. So we'd go and stay with him, and all I ever saw was people walking around with like drumsticks and basses and things. I was like, this place is amazing. So I was like, right, we basically hatched that plan. We were like, let's just go there, and we were drowning in thousands of musicians. Got there, and it wasn't quite like that. Couldn't find any bloody bassists. They're all either too tall, or they're into like new metal. So
I thought all bassists were tall anyway.
Yeah, they were all called Matt. For some reason, everyone we met was called Matt, and they were really tall, and they were really into Limp Bizkit. Like, I mean, I wasn't against Limp Bizkit, but just at that time, it was like there was a bit of a divide in the kind of sort of like, if you're in the live band scene, And I was like more into sort of like At the Drive-In or things that were kind of on that further end of it, But yeah, Limp Bizkit was like a bridge too far at the time, because we loved Korn, and like Type I Negative, but yeah, the Limp Bizkit thing was kind of like new metal wasn't quite for us. So at the time, anyway, and but then we did find a bassist who wasn't called Matt, and he wasn't like 7 foot tall, and he wasn't into Limp Bizkit, and he was into the Pixies and like a lot of like new wave stuff, and he brought a lot of cool influences into what we were doing. So that was great. And then we met our drummer, and it happened pretty quickly. And then we just rehearsed every day. Like we literally, the only time we had off was if you had to go to a funeral or a wedding, really. But that was kind of about it. But we were too young to know anyone who was getting married, so we didn't really have any days off really, and just did it. And to be honest, also like before social media and before video games got good and stuff, life was actually it was a lot more chill, bordering on boring actually, because what else are you going to do? Like, you just chase girls, and you just drink, and you just play in your band. And I used to look around at people who didn't have that kind of stuff, like who didn't have like a hobby like that, and they were just bored shitless, like they just didn't do anything. And I was like, thank God we've got a band, because what else would we do with our time?
So with the band, obviously, settled on the name Battle, but obviously started it as Casper Jack, which evolved into Morphic Fields and then Killing Moon. So what was the story behind the band names, and why did you settle on Battle?
Well, because it sort of, we kind of went through the eras of influences. Like when we started taking being in a band seriously and stopped just like shouting and smashing things up, we got into like bands who kind of did that but in a more musical way. So like garage rock bands from the 60s, like I suppose like the Sonics was a big thing, but then like the Small Faces, and through that kind of linked back to, I had a really early formative love of like Motown and soul, because that's the kind of music I sort of grew up with, that was being played in my household, and very, very soulful music. Like there was a lot of reggae, but a lot of Motown, a lot of disco. Though bands like the Small Faces, like Steve Merritt and the Small Faces, like had a huge influence on me, and through that I kind of discovered the Jam and like, you know, Style Council. So the Casper Jack thing came because my dad had this my dad was like the best dressed guy back when he was like in his 20s, and he had loads of like just cool clothes that he'd actually kept, and in the jacket of one of his velvet sort of like, it was like a suede, there was a suede jacket, there was this label called Casper Jack, and I was like, oh, it must be some famous fashion house or something. Couldn't find any other clothing by this brand, so I was like, well, I'll have that then. So we called our first band Casper Jack, and it was a very like mod kind of band, and there were lots of rules about it. Like we couldn't have any effects, the guitars had to be plugged straight into an amp, and it was just the sound of your guitar in your amp, and it was just that kind of sound, very raw and quite, yeah, just raw really. And then as you kind of like get into, that was like the 60s, then you kind of discover the 70s, and then punk obviously, and punk had that raw thing which really appealed to me, and the Sex Pistols and the Buzzcocks, and that then took us into almost like needing a new name, because we were kind of growing out of the Casper Jack thing. So we kind of, Morphic Fields was this kind of more psychedelic thing. There was a band at school, but in the year above, a couple of years above, we called Morphic Fields, who disbanded. So I was like, I like that. We'll just have that. So we were just forever stealing things. Nothing was ever original with us. And the most obvious and blatant theft was when we discovered post-punk, after punk, and then like The Killing Moon by Echo and the Bunnymen. Just to this day, the opening guitar lick on that, I'm just like, it's so transportative and so like evocative. And post-punk for us, like with Echo and The Cure and Joy Division, Smiths, Wedding Present House of Love, all those groups, they had that thing of like, they were really like minimal in the way punk was, but they had just the right amount of effects, like the right amount of like reverb basically. But they were gothy, and they were kind of like, it was all very like midnight vibe, like they're in a cemetery or something. It was just dark the whole time, and that really, really appealed to like 21 or 18 to 19-year-old selves. Well, like we're kind of starting to get a lot more moody with stuff, you know, and like in yourself, you start to feel quite brooding and a bit morose about life. And we were like faced with the idea of like being sort of getting chucked out of like being teenagers into this like new adult world, where I think you get to stay younger for longer nowadays, but kind of back then we had friends who were like just getting jobs at the age of 21, and people were getting married in their early 20s and having kids, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to really, like the world feels a bit grim actually, you know. And at this like, we were in this new century, like, you know, we got the 20 like to the whole 2000 thing behind us, but there was like Twin Towers, you know, 9/11 happened, and everything just started nosediving. It's like the world feels like really shit. And then there was an economic crisis and housing crisis. And I think, yeah, like being in a band basically became like the only safe space to be, you know, because we started traveling a lot through, I mean, we'd all traveled independently, but when you travel through being in a band and you see like the real bits of not just like the UK, but like Europe and like America, you realize that it's not all that it's like cracked up to be. And it's like,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's pretty grim, like especially going across America. It was just like, you just go to these like really, you know, like when you're in like the middle of like, do you know, like Bible bashing, gun toting, but fuck nowhere, you know, you're just like, what is this place? Why does it feel like we're 100 years behind? So yeah, I think I kind of like it felt like a really like safe place to be. So then when we got to battle, and that's the thing, is like, for us it felt like to be in a band you do have to just fight for what you want. Like there was an emerging idea that you can just kind of manifest your life, just follow your dreams, just like manifest what you want. And it's like, I don't think life is like that. I think if you really want something, you've got to like be prepared to sweat for it and like fight for your dreams, even just fight for a normal life. Because if you just sit back and sleepwalk into a really, just a life you don't want, it might be a nice life, but it might not be the life you want, and therefore it's a shit life. And that happens because you don't fight for things. So battle really That was what it was about. It wasn't because we rehearsed near battle or any of the other like theories around it. There was a song by Wookie. It was a garage song because garage was happening concurrent to Britpop, and we were all into garage. Jamie and I were massive garage heads. We were always trying to find ways of getting garage into what we were doing. And this song by Wookie called Battle came out, and it was the opening. Well, the lyric on the chorus was "Every day it's like a battle, but we'll push on through." And I was like, well, that's exactly what we're trying to do here. That's how it kind of came about, really. And then so from Casper Jack to Morphic Fields to Killing Moon to Battle, and then it felt like, okay, that's our thing. Even though we nicked it again, we're always nicking stuff. So we nicked the name from the song, but that was like the most original we felt, you know.
Before we get on to kind of your releases and the start of your career, and obviously you mentioned kind of Limp Bizkit, but so round about that time, because I remember it, the music that was there for me was Travis, Coldplay, Embrace, and then you had Limp Bizkit, Eminem, and that's what there was at that time. The Strokes appeared, and kind of it just seemed to kickstart everything overnight. I can mind talking to Ross when I had Ross on the podcast before, and he said how much things changed when the Strokes appeared. So what's your kind of recollection of that?
It was, I mean, I think Ross and I, we might have even spoken about this as well. Like, it was everything like the way like rock history books have remembered it, which was like you say, overnight it just kind of ripped it up and started again. It sort of reminded you that there was a way to make music with guitars, that because I think like Britpop obviously heavily referenced the 60s and it didn't really touch the 70s, not much. And I think in this country we had a memory of the 70s being more like glam rock, like, like Slade were great, but there was like the Bay City Rollers, and then there was that whole kind of like Laurel Canyon singer-songwriter scene. So the 70s, for us growing up, we didn't have a memory of it, but our understanding of it was this quite tame thing, but with the kind of like more teeny bopper stuff happening band-wise. But in America, they had the whole like CBGB thing. So you had like Blondie and the Ramones and Talking Heads, and that was their kind of answer to punk, and sort of, and then like the new wave stuff like Devo. So it was really interesting, but it was way more underground because we didn't have that social media to connect us to all those groups in the way like a young kid might now. If you didn't have someone who passed you that record, like the best of Devo or the best of Blondie on CD, you were kind of outside of that. You only knew what you knew, like what was around you. And obviously, of course, 70s was about disco in this country. It was like punk was quite short-lived, and it was mainly about disco and dance music. And a lot of it was great. Chic, for example, one of the best bands of all time. So the Strokes for us was like a gateway to this whole parallel sort of like pantheon of bands and artists that we'd heard the names of, but we hadn't really had a chance to listen to. So once we were like, you could spend a whole year just listening to Talking Heads and just be like, what the hell have I fucking missed this, And then through that, you then get into their kind of the UK counterparts, the things that were happening like the sort of 80s, like Duran Duran were massive, obviously, in Spandau, but what about Talk Talk and Tears for Fears and all these really cool like synthwave bands? So then you look back and you start looking harder because, again, we didn't really have, the internet was there, but it was shit. So you then go into record stops and start kind of crate digging and like looking for like obscure CDs. And then once you found this stuff, like it was like, oh my God, like, this is incredible. And it also happened to be our 20-year look back, because when you're 18, 19, you look back and you start to romanticize the era around when you were born. So it's, early 80s, mid 80s. And you want to know more than what the charts were telling you. And you start to develop a sensation or an idea that the charts are probably a bit rigged, that kind of payola thing's happening. So you're like, okay, well, what was actually going on, like, in the scene? Yeah, so the Strokes really were like a passport to this forgotten stuff. And because Britpop did, the end of Britpop was the fag end of it, like the fag end of any movement. It was just a bit like, it got bad, like it got kind of a bit boring. And I think when Travis, like that album, The Man Who, came about, I think people were just ready for just a reaction to Britpop, like had that album come out, at the height of Britpop, it probably wouldn't have done very well. But the time was right for a more laid back, like less kind of like Larry laddie sound with guitars. And I think Coldplay, like they did, it was the right time for them. And I think Coldplay are a great band. I bet they were a reaction to Britpop, and all the excesses that went with it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You have all these musical cycles come after each other. Everything's a reaction to something beforehand, and that's how we get to kind of your scene. I mean, like 2005, you started releasing obviously your debut, which did that come out in Fierce Panda?
I lost you for a moment, but I think you're back.
Yeah, so Isabel, for what I've got down here, came out in Fierce Panda, is that correct?
That's it, yeah.
So obviously Fierce Panda had Simon Williams. He was very early on in my podcast. So Fierce Panda, brilliant label. It's released stuff for Ash, Embrace,
Yeah.
Coldplay,
Coldplay, yeah.
Idlewild, I think, as well. So your first release on Fierce Panda, man, you must that must give you a kind of sense of you're going in the right direction.
Yeah, Martin, I mean, definitely, because Simon Williams was already a legend then, and Fierce Panda was like a known, like, cool brand. It was like, you had like Rough Trade with Jeff Travis and Fierce Panda, but Fierce Panda were felt more kind of like even smaller, like almost like a bedroom thing, and I felt Simon Williams had such a good ear. So he was so enthusiastic about us and so positive and supportive. And I still remember the questions he asked me very early on, like very probing questions about like questions that were bigger than music. I remember one time he said, are you working from the inside out or from the outside in? And I was just like, that question floored me because I was like, I don't know. I still don't know actually like what the answer like to that is. But to be aligned with some of those artists, because Idlewild as well, were like a huge influence. I just loved the way, like when Idlewild started playing much bigger shows in like arenas. For me, that's when not that I lost interest, but like there are some bands and some groups that should always just play in front of like 500 people, where you feel you can see the whites of their eyes. And you see a band like Idlewild back then doing those sorts of much smaller shows. It's just like it's such a great group. And Simon Williams, I think he understood how to like market groups of that size. I think genuinely don't think he's got interest in like, I don't know, I can't speak for him, but it felt like he didn't have an interest in doing that kind of stadium level stuff. He wasn't in it for that. Fierce Panda wasn't about that. It was quite grassrootsy and discovering like raw talent and trying to help that talent find its audience. So that was a big thing. And we were very, very fortunate that he was as supportive as he was to us.
And then your second single, Demons, Transgressive Records, sold out 1,500 copies in a day. So again, like with every release, there's something niche about it. How did that feel, kind of selling out all your copies in that time?
I mean, like, you don't think you're ever going to sell. You don't know you can't kind of fathom 1,500 people going into a shop on one day and buying all of that. There was a lot of hype around us. I think that's definitely going to it's fair to say that that's going to help things, but no one thought it was going to sell out in a day. And just it's a lot of product to shift. It was Transgressive. They were very young at the time. I think they were like 18 and 19, and just sort of, we were like the first artists that were kind of, first real artists that they'd been working with. So no, it's not like they were even like vastly experienced, but what Toby and Tim at Transgressive had more than anyone that we were speaking to was they had a lot of like just belief in who they were and what their vision was for for their label. I think people like Simon Williams were hugely influential on their approach, and they are great label people. They understand how a label should like help a band and what small steps you should take early on, because it's the first few steps. Getting from A to B to C are like the hardest steps. I think once you get to C to Z is kind of pretty
Yeah.
it's pretty easy, right? It's pretty because like selling the first 1,000, it's hard. It's the hardest 1,000 you'll ever sell, and then from 1,000 onwards it just gets easier. So that was a big surprise, and we never took not a single sale for granted, because you still can't believe that anyone more than your friends are going to turn up to your show. It's like such a privilege, right? When these people turn up, you don't know who they are. They're just strangers, and then like they know all the words, and they've got the vinyl with them, and like it's just, I don't know, it's still just, there's so much gratitude, and more so now obviously because it's so much harder to achieve that.
Yeah. And then and in the following year, and you released more singles. You released Tendency, Children, and what was the other one? Dynasty, was it? Beautiful Dynasty. And then kind of culminated in the kind of, what are we calling it? An EP or a mini album, but Back to Earth.
So
what would you class that as?
Martin, I'll go with whatever you think it is, because I still don't know, because this is kind of where the wheels like start to fall off, because now, what I do understand, one of the few things I do think I understand, is that we were always meant to be a smaller, more punky band that worked like thick and fast, just put things out quickly. But because we'd signed a deal which was like a joint venture with Warner Records as well, because they offered us a lot of money and we didn't have a lot of equipment and there's a lot of things we need to buy. So it kind of seemed like a good idea. But then when you sign with a major, you then enter into like the A&Ring and the kind of the agenda of a major label, which is absolutely fine. But sometimes there's a conflict of interest in terms of like, or a conflict of the agenda of like the smaller label and what they want for you, which might be what's right, and a major label that has to like recoup that money. So we'd made our debut album. We'd gone off to Jacob's studio, which is where the Smiths had recorded, and the Arctic Monkeys had just gone in to record Whatever People Say I Am, and we were going in as they were coming out. And we'd made our album pretty quickly. And it sounded like we kind of did live, and that was kind of the point, because we were quite a ferocious, tight live band. But at a major label level, they felt that it wasn't major label sounding enough, because back then people were starting to record to like on the grid, to click tracks, and things were sounding a bit cleaner, just a bit more radio. Basically, they wanted to be a little bit less Radio X, as it was XFM at the time, and a bit more like Radio 1, which we probably should have pushed back on a little bit more. But when you're that young, you assume the people who are older than you just kind of, they're wiser and they must know more because they're a record label. So we made this album, but then it was deemed not radio enough. So then they were like, we need to go back and like make some more records. So in the end, we made another record which took some of the songs from that first album on it, but expanded out into a full record. Sorry, it became like an EP, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And then we quickly followed it up with some newer songs that were coming through, that then became like an album proper. But in my heart of hearts, really, there is only one Battle album that ever came out, and it's that unheard album of these songs that were sequenced in a particular way that are the perfect snapshot of who we were in like 2005, 2006, really. Yeah, but that's not how other people will remember it. Other people will remember it as what it actually was, which was that EP and then that bigger album. And so I think by that point, things have got so confused, and you're pulling in all different directions. A band like the band we were, it can't last that much longer, and it just burns itself out, which is what it did.
So, like, obviously on the EP, you worked with Gareth Jones on some of the songs. Looking at like Gareth Jones' previous work, he's worked with Depeche Mode, Erasure, so quite kind of synth electro sort of stuff. Then I've seen maybe prior to you, he worked with Interpol on Turn on the Bright Lights. What was it like working with him? Did you enjoy that experience, or was that part of the kind of what you didn't like about the journey? What's your experience with him?
I mean, Gareth Jones is amazing. I mean, he's like, as you just mentioned, like, just some of the people he's worked with. He is to get the best out of any producer, you have to appreciate you have to allow them the space to experiment with you, and you have to be malleable. I think we definitely were guilty of being quite fixated on certain, like a sort of perceived wisdom about what we thought we should be doing. We were quite, like pig-headed, and definitely quite arrogant about what we thought we should be doing. So I think we would have got way more out of our time with Jonesy if we'd just been like do your thing, man, just like dig in and just like show us what you want to do, because he's like one of the brightest guys you'll ever meet. I mean, he's a Cambridge graduate who knows so much about music. He's had a studio up at the Strong Room since like I think like the late 90s. I mean, he makes music all day, every day. He's constantly putting music out. He's a complete music nut, and he's great with technology, and he's great with, like, he's got about 1 million different mics. He knows what they all do. He's great with the physics of sound. I think, we work with so many great people, like Gareth Jones, Dave McCracken, Ben Hillier, who produced like Blur. Dave McCracken did Ian Brown. He did the FEAR, album Music of the Spheres. So, and actually, even and Hugo Nicholson, he worked with Primal Scream. We worked with all these amazing producers, and I think latterly, after the fact, only were we able to was I able to personally say, oh, wow, this is what I learned from that person. This is what I learned from this person. But in the moment, you're just really fixated on like, I'm trying to get to my vision of this, and everyone else is just getting in my way, which is kind of, it's like, it is definitely a form of like youthful arrogance,
And then, as you kind of touched on, like, so the new album came out proper 2007, Break the Banks album, and then shortly after that, kind of, he's disbanded. So touch on the reason there behind kind of why it came to an end.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually looking back, Jamie, our guitarist, and I have spoken about how we maybe shouldn't have disbanded. We shouldn't have we should have held our nerve and not thrown in the towel. I think for all of our front about being this well, we were like a feral, quite like hard sounding band. I think on the inside we were just like quite sensitive young boys. I think it just got to a point where our personal relationships in the band made everyday life feel a bit grim, and we were so tired and probably lacked that extra bit of tenacity that like bigger bands have, where they can weather those kinds of storms. They can focus on the bigger picture and say, look, it's hard now, but let's like talk about what we're going through. Let's maybe air our problems. Let's like self-therapize or whatever. Let's get through it. I mean, like now through a modern lens of like well-being and like the mental health revolution, we if it was happening now, we would have carried on. We would have solved the problems, found solutions. But back then it's like every door felt closed, and we were so like a little bit of that gallows humor started to creep in, like, this feels quite doomed, like maybe this is doomed, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy and it's the way it's meant to be. And it's that kind of Club 27 thing, like live fast die young type thing, like it's better to burn bright than to burn out than to fade away. So
yeah, I mean, there is that, obviously, I had Sam Herlihy for Hope of the States on, and he kind of touched on that as well, about the kind of, there wasn't the kind of support for mental health, obviously, with what that band went through with Jimmy Lawrence taking his own life, and they were just kind of expected to, like, after a couple of weeks, right, come on, get on with the album. So there was that kind of, at that period of music, it was like a machine. If you weren't working, then they would just chuck you to the side and they'd get somebody else in. So I can understand the pressure then.
yeah, and it's like, and the industry is like, it's always kind of, I suppose, at any level where there's a lot of money at stake, people are they don't give you that much time to, like to fix things. They just want to get to the show. It's like bums on seats, and it's like we can romanticize it as much as we want, but ultimately, like, it's a capitalist system that we've engaged with, and it's all about, you've got to shift units, and you've got to like get on the radio, and you've got to like turn up, and if you don't, someone else will. So, and there's so many people involved. Like if it was like a cottage industry and there was like human empathy, lines of human empathy, and you knew the people, like you really knew everyone in your team, it might be different. But when it's like that big and there's that many people involved, it becomes quite faceless, and no one kind of cares about your personal situation. I remember there's one time, I think we were like in Nottingham, or we were somewhere in the mid, maybe in the Midlands somewhere, and I was walking around before the gig, and I was so depressed, I was so down about, I couldn't see a way out. Like I was walking over this river somewhere, maybe it was Nottingham, and walking over this river, and I was just like staring like into the abyss of this river, just thinking, what is the point? And I just got back to the tour bus, and I kind of like sort of just broke down, like, and it's very unlike me because I'm not actually somebody who, I actually have even to this day, I'm a bit like, when it comes to like crying and things like that, I wish I could do that more, like show more like vulnerability, and I think it's just something I'm working on. But back then I was even more reserved and really closed off, and I just sort of broke down, and there was like some of the band were there and some crew, and no one really knew what to do or say. Like nobody had any kind of emotional literacy. No one had been taught that. None of us were equipped with any kind of language or mechanisms to deal with it. And so what then happened was everyone just quietly receded from the tour bus, sort of left me to it, and I was just there feeling even worse because like, yeah. I thought that's what I wanted, was to be left alone, because I suddenly felt really embarrassed, but actually it's the worst thing in the world. And then like half an hour later I had to go and play a show, and I just thought at the end of that, I was like, this is not a very nice life, Yeah, it always felt much better when you're on the way up, when you're journeying towards something, because you're all in the same boat, you're all driving towards something. And when you get that thing, unless your purpose keeps expanding, and your goals keep increasing, you can start to lose a bit of focus, because it's a bit like, well, we've done that thing now, like what do we do? And all I ever wanted to do was put a record out. It was like I just wanted to put a record out that had my name on it, and I think and just play shows. But as those shows got bigger and bigger, I started getting further and further from the thing I the most wanted, which was just to connect with people and to like have a good time making, not a good time making music, but to feel really productive and to feel like gratified in the process of making music. I know that bit of it is hard and it should be. I'm not saying I want an easy life at all. What I didn't want was a life that felt that emotionally grueling and without any kind of like sunshine in it at all. So I've got a clock in the background that's got a bird sound on it.
No, that's all right. Listen, I'm battling. I've got 2 dogs here at my feet that are pestering the life out of me. So if I look like I'm not paying attention, I am, but I'm just trying to settle them at the same time.
No worries, man.
So 19 years then for kind of, I say 19 years for you played live, but looking through Instagram last night, I've seen that he's got up on stage 2015 for somebody's wedding.
Yeah.
How was it? How was that then? Kind of doing that for the first time then?
It was terrible because I was like, totally underprepared and like drunk and, whatever else,
Was that just like a spur of the moment thing? Like, oh, come on up and give us a few songs, or was there any kind of pre-planning to that?
I mean, maybe like an afternoon's worth of prep, but all of that goes out the window when you've had a drink. Because if you're not in the system of like touring and gigging, when you cram for something and you're under pressure, you kind of forget what you've crammed a bit. Well, I do anyway. So that was pretty terrible. And it kind of confirmed that splitting up was the right thing to do. Like, I know, like the Maccabees have talked recently about like when they I remember they talked not recently, but they said when they got back together, it was because one of them got married, and the only band they wanted to have at the wedding was the Maccabees. And when they all played together, it was like, oh, this is it. This is brilliant. This is magic. Whereas for us, it wasn't that at all. I think it took another 10 years certainly for me to figure out what it was about Battle that I loved and I thought was valuable and I thought was worth like protecting and like taking out of hibernation. Because actually, not even hibernation. I had to view it as something that was in hibernation as opposed to something that had been buried. And then once I saw it as something that just needed time away, it needed time to cool off, then it's like it became a different thing. And I think 10 years wasn't really long enough. 10 years is not a long enough period of time to like to think about, take stock of it, But 20 years is.
So in that time, obviously, other than getting up on stage for the wedding, what have you been doing in that time? I was looking through Instagram again, and I seen like Jamie's been doing stuff with working with 1975, for instance. So what about yourself? What have you been up to in that time?
I stayed on in the industry as like a writer and like a songwriter, and I just worked with a lot of people that were on the label. So I was around a lot of sessions, there's like Calvin Harris sessions, Kylie Minogue sessions, Roldy. I went out in America. I did a lot of songwriting for and with other people, like lots of different artists I got exposed to, a lot of them in the kind of pop world. And I was able to see how a different side of music was kind of put together. And it really helped me be less myopic about the music that I love, because I will always come back to my formative influence, which is like Nirvana for me is just like still the biggest band, the most important thing ever. When I was just about to become a teenager, it's like discovering Nirvana, and then a year later Kurt Cobain dies, but it's that which only made it more important to me. I'll always come back to that. I always thought it's something like you outgrow, but to me, I'm comparing everything to Nirvana constantly, or comparing everything to definitely maybe era Oasis, because those two things are like the same thing for me, actually, like the sound and the energy, but they're like the same vibe.
Yeah.
And so I'm always coming back to that. And I think the third point of like triangulation of that is as a slightly older teenager is the Strokes. Actually, is this it? It's more about what the simplicity of what it represents, because they kind of sum up so much of the other stuff that I love. So I'm always just coming back to that stuff, really. And despite all the stuff I did in the industry and all the stuff that I discovered that I love a lot of pop music. I do, but I just love making music that's quite raw, that feels quite raw, that's made quite quickly, and that uses I work with computers, obviously. I have a laptop and about 10,000 plugins, and and I've made a lot of like pop music, and it's very gratifying to listen to. But I do it because I love making music, and the music I love making the most is using music with guitars. And I suppose ultimately it's coming back to my earliest love, which is the Beatles. Which, you know, for most musicians they're going to say that it's nothing. There's nothing unusual about saying that, but I hear the Beatles and I still haven't outgrown that intense love and that personal love I have for them, where I think they mean more to me than anyone else. And no one else could possibly be a bigger Beatles fan than I am. And that those songs were written for me somehow. It's like, that's the relationship I have with the Beatles. And to me, there's something about just a voice and a guitar and an incredible chord sequence and an amazing melody that just, it trumps everything. I don't care how hard your 808s hit. And I don't care how like dirty your bass is. If you've got those simple, beautiful things, I think it beats everything. So kind of going around the houses, trying loads of different stuff out, kind of helps to confirm and corroborate what I felt in my waters as a kid, but I couldn't define. I'd have no way of justifying it. I had to kind of go on this mad journey to then, as an adult, be like, actually, kid, you were right. You were totally right to think for you that's the right type of music to make.
And so, I mean, that leads us on to kind of last year then, and kind of for nowhere, Battle appears on social media, and you started releasing all these kind of wee snippets and clippets for your career. So how did that go down, and what were you expecting when you started on this kind of return? Were you expecting the audience to be there straight away, and how did it feel once you realised there was that appetite?
But I mean, thing is, because Jamie and I, we stayed in music, like Jamie, you know, as producer and a mixer, and me as a songwriter, and I did a lot of artist development as well. So I'm sort of, it's like every year I get older, but the age of musicians around me has stayed the same. If anything, they've got younger, and so I'm really aware that things move quite quickly. And even, you know, 10 years into it, I was like, well, this will be a forgotten thing. And we existed before like the digitization of music. So we weren't on DSPs and we had no digital footprint. And it just seemed like a mountain to climb to try and establish that. Both Jamie and I have like also worked at university level with artists and musicians, you know, trying to like pay forward some of that experience we've had. And Jamie had started playing some battle stuff to his students who were like kind of very young Gen Z, just because, you know, you have lessons where you're sharing music and you introduce them to things, and that they found out that he was used to be in a band. They were like, oh, Jamie, you know, play us some stuff. And I'd had similar experiences where they're like, you know, we were quite coy about it, but they you know, they do their homework. And so they know who's talking in front of them, and they put you on the spot. And you have to be accountable, and you'd be like, okay, great. Well, you know, I stand by it. Here's some music. And hearing the reactions of these kids who were like 15, you know, nearly 20 years younger than us, was like a bit like, it kind of floored us, because they were like so into it, like unbelievably into it. And it was almost like in that period there'd been enough music made that had moved so far away from guitar music that to their ears what we were doing sounded like the freshest thing like ever. Because they were like getting into the idea, well, let's start going out. Like, I know it's expensive, but therefore let's start making our own band nights and making fanzines, and let's start forming bands. And like the music on the radio, one of them actually said words to the effect of, the music on the radio doesn't say anything to me about my life. And I was like, yeah, just like Morrissey said with the Smiths. And he was like, what? And I was like, well, that's what Morrissey said. And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, the music they play says nothing to me about my life. And he did not know what I was talking about, but he was basically saying the same thing, basically like 30 years on. And it's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. And music culture had got to a point where for a lot of kids, you know, dance music or pop music just wasn't speaking to them about their experiences. So they had to take it into their own hands. Around this time, Jimmy and I both weirdly started having dreams about battle. We were having these weird fever dreams where we were on stage, but like things are going wrong, and it was like, you know, the GCSE dreams you have where you've got to go and do an exam, you haven't done any revision for it, like, what am I even doing here? And it's like we're about to play a gig and no one can remember the chords. It was these weird, like slightly like nightmarish dreams. And then we started talking about it, and we're like, well, should we just like what would it look like if we did a show? And initially I was like, well, let's just do an open mic night and just play a couple of songs, just get out of our system, because there's clearly this kind of weird suppressed urge to do something. And then all credit to Jamie. He was like, "Oh, I think we can do a bit better than that, man." I was like, "Why don't we just like do a show? Like, why not do a show and just do it to like 100 people or so? Like, we don't have to like be all like pompous about it. Just do a nice small, the kind of shows we used to like doing back in the day." So I think that's how it came about, and we had no expectation that anyone would remember. If they remembered, care. But we sort of did it anyway, and now we're here, and now we've got to play a show in 3 weeks.
So this show coming up, and like looking at you today, I seen Record Store Day today. Obviously, be the time this will go out next week, but looking at you the time of recording, it was Record Store Day, and you were out and about. So how was that kind of connecting with fans?
I was like totally unprepared for it because for some reason, I had no sleep the night before. I had one of those nights where I got 2 little kids, and it wasn't really their fault. I just like my whole circadian rhythm is just a bit messed up, and I knew that I had to be up at 4 to be in Liverpool Street. To get to Shoreditch for 6, and it was got to like 2 in the morning. I just wasn't asleep, and I was like, I'm just not going to sleep now, am I? So I just stayed awake, and then I thought I'm going to go along and I'm going to just hand out some flyers, and it's going to be maybe a bit transactional or whatever, but there'll be loads of people there handing out flyers, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I get there. The queues are just, you can't fathom these queues, Martin. I mean, it's like, but the passion for buying vinyl is just off the scale. It's like snaking round the block twice. And people have been camping overnight. They're in these little like sleeping bags. And it's like 6 in the morning. And I've got this, we had 1,500 flyers printed up. And I've got 750, 2 wads of them in my coat pocket. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and just start handing these out. But something weird happened whereby, because these people have been in the queue for like ages, just in their own little world, trying to keep warm, not talking to anyone. As soon as I sort of said hello, they kind of like, initially they were like, go away, but then they kind of open up and they're glad to have a bit of conversation. And I found that I was, with every flyer I handed out, I was having like a sort of 5-10 minute conversation, and I handed out over 1,000 flyers and basically had over 1,000 individual conversations with people in all these various record shop queues, Rough Trade East, Quick Records in Kingston, Sister Ray, and it was just unbelievable. And I was just talking to people not about battle, because it wasn't really, it stopped being about battle actually. It became about, why do you like music? Like, why are you buying vinyl? Like, do you still go to gigs? And if not, what are the barriers to entry? And we just became this like conversation about music. I learned so much about how engaging with music has changed in the last 20 years. Yeah, I was just like blown away by these insights, and then by the end of the conversation, I'd be like, if you're interested, if you're around, if you're anywhere near London, like take a flyer. We're playing. I'd love to see you there. And they were all really like kind of grateful, really happy to take the flyer, and so it was an amazing day. I was knackered. It was 9 hours solid, and I'd done like 22,000 steps. I'd walked 22,000 steps, had 1,000 conversations. I mean, the figures sound made up basically, but it's all on record, so.
After doing all these steps, all the conversations, to then come on the podcast, and it's you're certainly putting the work in.
I think the thing is, I when it's like this, I love it. I love talking. It probably comes across, but I can just talk forever, in the sense that I love talking about music and people making music, and I love seeing people do the things they love. This podcast is great. It's like no one's asked you to do this; you've just done it, and that element of art has always appealed to me. Like, no one asked Picasso to start painting. There are some things that you need, and you go and there's a task and you put a remit out and people do a great job. But there are some things that people just do because they want to do it, and it becomes really important to people. I don't care if it's big or small. I'm just interested in things that are impactful to people. And I think podcasts have that power, and like music has that power, because it's about just communicating. So I'm here for that, like all day, every day. I've got loads of time. And I think gigs do that. With a gig, when a gig gets too big, it feels like the communication thing gets lost. But when it's still at a certain level, like those Barfly gigs or Water Rats gigs, it does still feel like it's a two-way thing, and you're reacting to the crowd.
Yeah, I mean that's so. I've been trying to do this year. I've been trying to do a gig a month, at least a gig a month. So, I went to see. I've done January, February, March. We're into April. So last week I drove up. I was in London. I was in Crawley, and I drove up last Thursday, and no one would take my ticket for Kyle Faulkner. So I drove straight up to London, in the house, got changed, and straight into Glasgow to King Tut's. I went to see Kyle Faulkner, and then tomorrow I'm away to see Dave McCabe for the Zootons, and he's playing the Hug and Pint in Glasgow, which is the band that I manage, they played in there last year, and it's a 200 cap venue. So to see an artist of that established status playing in a wee venue like that, you can't beat it. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. And, you know, like you say, King Tut's, for example, I remember there are lots of bigger venues that we've played I've got no memories of, but all the smaller ones, like the Wedgwood Rooms in Portsmouth, the Joiners Arms in Southampton, King Tut's, you know, Glasgow, I remember every time we played that, I've got specific memories of all those individual gigs because they just feel like they're the right size. And they're just something so special. And like you say, when you watch an artist play a venue that's like deliberately too small for them, the atmosphere is just different. It's electric. And
Yeah,
I know there's a more capitalist drive to try and reach up a bit higher and try and punch above your weight. And like maybe you won't fill it, but you'll have an extra hard drive on socials, and you get some people that might not have come, but they buy a ticket. And I understand all that because it's like you are going to make a lot more money. But if you can do a gig where everyone buys a ticket immediately as soon as it's announced, you just know the gig's going to be good, don't you?
yeah, and that's the thing. Like if you play, you've got these people in that maybe aren't sure. You might not get the connection, but if you're playing in a small place like King Tut's, I've never seen a bad gig in it. Like so, like when I went last week, obviously you're there for Kyle, you're there for the guy you bought the ticket for, but I always go, I always make sure I watch all the support, and I've never seen a bad support band in there either. I don't know what it is about maybe it's the venue, it's the magic of the place or whatever, but you've got these wee venues up and down the country or in Britain that they're the places that need our support as well. These wee
They
venues.
really do. And as I get older, like I realize that how important it is to these places need defending, and they need, like as you say, they need support. I know they get the support from the gig goers, but I'm not sure if they get the support from the local councils or even from like central government, because that sense of like the arts and the way those venues allow artists to find and connect with audiences cannot be underestimated. As you say, is it the size, the sound, the location? No one really knows. It's probably all of those things, but like the people who run these venues and the staff, the people who care, like they do such a hard job, and I don't think it's recognised. Quite even often by sometimes the audience, they're just blind to, as you naturally would be. You're just kind of blind to some of that stuff that's happening around it. But there's this whole ecosystem, and a great venue that can last over many decades has clearly put the work in. And I just think without it being protected and defended, they'll one by one they'll just get picked off, and then there'll be nothing left really, or they'll just be really crap venues that just are so clinical. You don't get a vibe when you step into it, you know? And that's not great for the artist, and it's not great for the consumer, because then people just go, oh, well, live gigs are a bit crap, aren't they? And you can watch a great band with a great audience in a rubbishy venue, and you can walk away feeling like the band were crap, and it's not the band's fault at all.
Yeah.
It's not the audience's fault. I mean, there's sometimes I've seen bands play to audiences where the audience seem a bit dead, and it's because like the audience are kind of just responding to the environment they're in, and they're like, this feels like a dead place to be in. And the band are working really hard, but the audience just feel like, just don't really want to be here.
So that all sounds amazing. Probably the last question I'm going to ask you before I go into Heroes is, obviously after this gig, what's the plans for Battle? Is there plans, or is it day by day?
It's, you know what, I think there are, because it's really hard to do this without the next, like, oh, well, what if we do this and what if we do that comes up, and of course all roads lead back to making music, which is the whole reason to do it. I think our like modernist like founding principle, you know, we're all, you know, Jamie and I certainly really identify strongly with the principles of like mods, the idea of like being present, like be here now, but don't forget the past, because you know you can't. The thing for me is like there's no point thinking about the future too much, because you can't control it and you can't change the past, but you can only control what's happening right now. So being really present, being really modern, but taking the best bits of what you've learned from to push forward is the kind of, I suppose, our sort of like our religion. And musically speaking, we have to move forward. If this was just a nostalgia thing, we'd be going against everything we believe in. Like I get that nostalgia is a powerful currency, but that is not why we're doing it. We're doing it as almost like an experiment to see like, A, can we still do it? And like, B, would people still care? And then if we can still do it and people still care, then C is we should do new things with it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that looks like, or let alone sounds like, but it's like the drive and the aim is there for us to do that. And I think that is the most important thing, that like we go into it with two eyes open, and then I think it will be something vital and something quite visceral.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is that appetite for it there, obviously. Like speaking to Ross earlier, so he's in recording fresh material. It is. I've touched on it with guests before. See when you've took this long away. Sometimes you need this long away. Like obviously you touched on it, but see, like your audiences, because of the age we are as well, the audience goes away. The audience will dip. When I had young kids, I didn't go to as many gigs. And kind of I'm out the other end of it, and I'm at gigs all the time again. So you kind of got that where the band and the audience will both die away, and then they both come back, and we all meet again and say, right, let's crack on and do it all again. So I wish you every success with this gig, and then whatever comes from it. The last part of the podcast, obviously, it's called Time for Heroes. So I asked my guest to pick 4 heroes to come for dinner. Why are they your heroes, and what would you cook for them? They can be dead or alive, musicians, sports people, whatever you like. But 4 heroes, and what you cooking for them, and why?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because your mind immediately goes to I think there's like the most 3 I think always picked are like things like Hitler, Genghis Khan, and Lenin. You know, it's just like the most like famous, like interesting, like iconic people or whatever. But for me, once I get past that initial like knee-jerk reaction, I'm like, oh, who would I actually want to have at dinner? I was kind of surprised with like what rose to the surface, because the first one that came to mind was probably one of my all-time, like, I don't know if I have musical heroes, but I have people that I like massively respect for like how they do things, for the things they've achieved. And so that would be Mike Skinner. Is like, out of everyone, gun to head, if I had to pick somebody, Mike Skinner's obviously, you know, thank God he's not dead yet, very much alive and kicking, you know.
I can confirm that. I was in a mosh pit with him about a month and a half ago.
Really?
And at the Barrowlands, absolute class, man. He's no lost in it.
What I would have given to have been in that mosh pit with you both, because I just think the word genius gets thrown around. We need to be more economic with that word, but Mike Skinner is a genius, and his probably my all-time favorite album, A Grand Don't Come for Free. I think about the album quite a lot. It lives in my brain, like just thinking about that album, like how one man made that record so good and so like on point, and it's with such discipline and restraint and such class. And if that was the only thing he ever did, I'm happy with that, frankly. But the man is just he's a national treasure, and he's very, very influential. Like, my music doesn't sound anything like the Streets, I don't think, but anything he says about music, I listen to and take to heart, and I try and incorporate his methodology and approach, because I think he makes music with such a clear head. He's just so good. I think he's so good. So Mike Skinner he'd have to be there. And I hope one day I do get to just sort of sit and, at the very least, just, you know, have a cup of tea with him or something. Mike Skinner. And the other one is someone who is also alive, but is someone who I think probably a lot of people would pick, and it's Paul McCartney, because Paul McCartney has somehow managed to remain Paul McCartney for the last 60 years, and he's still Macca. It's like, how does someone maintain a brand that is clearly authentic, and he just knows his duty to music, and the man's prolific. He's still like making music, putting albums out and things, and he's always got something to say, and he's like got endless energy. And I bet he does go to bed and he's like knackered. He's just like, you know what, I could just have a day off today. But he's a bit like the closest thing music has to like you just crack on, never explain, never complain, you just get on with it. But he loves it. He's got eternal optimism. You know, if you're going to live a life, you could do a lot worse than living a life like Paul McCartney, even without the music. You know, I feel like even if he wasn't a musician, he'd just be a great guy to know. And I also respect the fact that he's got an ego. He definitely has an ego, and he definitely cares what people think about his work. But I just find him fascinating, and he can just talk. And apparently he could play. He's like, when he's jamming with people, like, he just wears people out, because he just keeps going and going and going. You know? The
thing with McCartney as well, so, I mean, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, Beatles, if you were a Beatles fan, you'd maybe be into, I was more John Lennon. I think there was a lot of people where it was either Lennon or McCartney. In the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years, for the Get Back came out, and then obviously a couple of weeks back the McCartney documentary came out, and see, just watching those two things gives an entirely different insight into him as well. It made me. I mean, I was obviously a Beatles fan, but as I say, we're swayed towards John Lennon. I thought John Lennon was all the politics and everything, and I just assumed Paul McCartney was just right. You're going to write the love songs, but there is so much more to him. Without him, with that Get Back documentary, you see the pivotal role he had in that. He done all that himself.
Yeah.
So, phenomenal.
Yeah.
I've got a lot more respect for him the last 5-10 years than I ever did.
I agree, and his career is kind of evidence of like to have those high points. You have to have a bit of a slump at some point. I think in the 90s, Paul McCartney was probably like not necessarily derided, but with only 30 years away from the Beatles, it's funny how you need certain chunks of time for people to forgive and forget. I remember there was that time when he was trying to get the credits relabeled. And the music press made a big thing about it. They were like, because all he wanted to do was say the songs that he wrote, instead of them all being labeled Lennon McCartney, they were McCartney Lennon. And as a songwriter, I completely get that. But it feels sacrilegious doing it once you've made that agreement. And especially if the other half of your songwriting team is dead and kind of can't really defend, hold up, have an argument, for their end of it. But despite all that stuff and despite the kind of all the memes about McCartney and things, I think he's such a class act, and he just rides through, and he's proven that if you hold your nerve, I think that's what it is to me. I think it's like if you hold your nerve and if you just be yourself, because like Oscar Wilde said, everyone else is taken. Don't pretend to be something you're not. Macca is just Macca. He's thumbs up Macca, right? That's ultimately cool because no one else can do you, and you're the best version of that. And he's just so consistent, and he's like. Oh, I think the man's amazing. I think he's brilliant. But like yourself, I'm actually, again, gun to head. I'm a bigger fan of Lennon's music. I think Lennon actually is the songwriter who appeals to me more. He's slightly more angular, more. It's the slight bitterness that he has that touches me, But then I hear a song like, maybe I'm getting older now, but I hear a song like, Here, There, and Everywhere, and it just like melts me. It's just so beautiful, It just destroys me. And like, I don't think Lennon ever actually did anything that had that purity of like love, or if he did, it was surprising because he was a man that was so like stinging with his his lyrics. But yeah, so Mac is the other one. The third person I'd have to have actually is one of the biggest music fans I've ever known in real life. He's a close friend of our family, and he sadly died. It's a guy called Colin who introduced me to Bowie like properly. Like, he was like the biggest Bowie fan ever, but he was also just a massive music fan, and he was a builder, like he's an amazing plasterer, and he used to do a lot of work for my dad. And I've known him since I was about 13. And when he found out that I was in a band and like playing music, he just would just give me music. He was like this kind of older brother I never had, and he gave me boxes and boxes of like his precious LPs to listen. He was like, Jason, just listen to this, like all these bootlegs of like these Bowie gigs, stuff that like people still haven't heard, I don't think, to this day, like real like underground stuff. He sadly was an alcoholic as well, and his marriage, and because he was an alcoholic, his marriage broke down, and he lost connection with his kids, and his life ended up just him living in this bedsit on his own. And one day he got up, and I think he was nursing a hangover, or he was just topping up, and he slipped, and he cracked his head on the sink, and he just bled out on his own, and he died on his own in this like really grim bedsit. This like amazing music, like this music, all that music he'd listened to and all that stuff he'd given me, and it just ended like that. And I remember my dad calling to tell me, and I was actually in the studio, I was at a music session, and it's the only time because I've received quite a lot of bad news while I've been in sessions, because I spend most of my time in studios, and you're usually just quite professional with it, and it's the only time I've sat there head in hands not knowing how to process it, and I still think about it now, like it's, to me, like I fucking cried, man. Like I really fucking miss that man. Like he really meant that much. But I have no way of fully like expressing it, because he was just like this kind of guy who I probably shouldn't have been that close to, really, because it was just like kind of came and went with the wind. But he just had such a lasting impact on my life, and he shaped my musical understanding. And he's not here anymore. But and I just love to have
heartbreaking, but the fact that you still talk that passionately about him means that as much as he's no here, like in in human form. He's still there somewhere. You still think about him. He's still kind of guiding you in some way.
Yeah,
That's
Martin, yeah, that's a
amazing.
beautiful way to put it, and I really I cling to that hope that when if you keep talking about people and they sort of live on and like you sort of remember them, like how they looked, like how they spoke and things like that, because very few people do remember him, because he was just, to most people, because he didn't really know that many people who were into music, so it was like he was this man who'd grown up never falling out of love with music, but he didn't really have anyone to share it with. And I think that's why he spent so much time with me, like kind of mentoring me. I remember his hand, his fingernails were always like all the way down to like the because he was a builder, right? So, and he was covered in plaster dust and stuff, and it was the most like disconnected thing, because you always think music fans like that are a bit like artsy and they sort of like hipsters and things like that. And he wasn't anything like that. He was a gruff, working class guy who knew so much about music. And I was one of the few people, I think, in his life that you could, and as I grew from being a kid to like a young adult, it was like, finally I've got someone I can really I can pass this stuff on to. And I thought I'd know him forever. I thought he would just be in my life forever, and I just kind of took it for granted. And he's not. And I just would love to have one more chat with him.
That's but and what was his name, Colin? Is he got a second name? Just so
Yeah,
you can
Colin
hear him.
Davies. Yeah.
Yeah, just so we're giving him the full kind of title, man. That's class, man. That's one of the best ever picks that we've had,
Oh,
because
thank you. Well,
means something. You know what I mean?
Yes, I mean, it's like he was a really cool guy, and I think everyone loved him, and it was just I miss him. I miss him a lot. But then the fourth person on a kind of like similar but different sort of thing is probably one of the brightest people I ever met. Was my granddad, like my dad's dad, who was born in 1915. He lived to about 95, and in my family, he's the only person at that level of my parents' or grandparents' level who ever really engaged like with my music, who would listen to it. So he was an architect, and he was totally self-taught. He grew up on this kind of so my dad's side of the family are Sri Lankan. They're from Sri Lanka. My mum's side of the family are from Trinidad and the Caribbean. And my mum and dad met in London in the house they live in now, actually, when they were like teenagers. And my mum was trained to be a nurse, and my dad was training to be an engineer. Since the height of the swinging 60s in London. And they met, and because they were from different countries, like basically these two different islands, they were like, well, I'm not going to go to your island, and you're not going to come to mine, so we'll just stay in London. And that's why I ended up being born in London, and it's like so random, like what are the chances of that? But my granddad, my dad's dad, is Sri Lankan. He grew up on this this subsistent farm in literally the middle of nowhere, without like a pot to piss in. And he just was from a very early age, he decided, I want more for my life. And he knew that he had this feeling he could draw, and so he kind of put himself through school and showed immense flair for drawing and like design. Managed to kind of get himself a place. All the while, his mum and dad were like, "There's no way you're getting the fuck off this farm. Like, you're going to stay here, and you're born here. You're going to die here." And he was like, "Fuck no, I'm going." So I managed to get himself through school and architectural college, and then became like the head of design or the head of irrigation for like the government. And he designed all their irrigation networks, and he designed buildings and statues, and he did all this amazing shit. Not because anyone made him do it or told him he had to do it, just because he decided, I want that for my life. Like, I'm going to be something. And because he tried so hard, he was able to send my dad to London. He chartered a flight, so my dad to the UK. And because he did that, my dad then met my mum and had me. And it's like, I sort of feel like if my granddad had no drive, I wouldn't exist, I just wouldn't be here. And I think he had some kind of empathy with me, the idea of me being in a band. Like, he didn't really understand it. The man was born in 1915. I mean, it was like, but he would listen to these early demos, these like punky demos, and he wasn't humoring me. Like, he would genuinely sit there and listen to them. And he'd be like, that bit's quite good. That bit, I don't understand how those bits connect. And he actually had a lens on it. Like, he could actually, in his own way, process it. And I just kind of took that for granted as well. I just thought, it's just my granddad listening to my music and he's got some opinions. But the man had opinions, and he really had opinions on this music, which just must have sounded like it was made by aliens. And I would love to sit down with him now and play him like Battle's back catalogue and be like, pick your favourite songs, like what do you reckon? And I just think him and Paul McCartney and Mike Skinner and Colin would actually all get on really well, weirdly.
Yeah, it does sound amazing, man. Honestly, like 4 super passionate picks, man. I think I've definitely enjoyed listening to they 4. It sounds like they would all bounce off each other so well.
Oh, glad, thank you.
Colin would love meeting these 3.
Yeah, he genuinely, because he'd be like, music fans do exist, or interesting people do exist, because he just, he didn't spend enough time with, he didn't get a chance to spend time with, people other than people he was with. I think he was kind of dragging him down in his life at the time, But yeah, and because I'm not the best cook. Like I've got lots of like grand ideas, but like it's safe to say music is one of the few things I'm not like entirely shit at. So when it comes to cooking, my aims are bigger than what I can actually achieve. So I really would have to keep it simple. But I went through a period in my life when I was making these amazing roast dinners. Well, I thought they were actually pretty good. And then I started to kind of boil it down to the idea of like, I'm sorry if this is offensive to anyone who's a vegan or vegetarian out there, but one of my favorite things to do after I watched this film called Amélie, which came out, I think, in the French film. It came out in late 90s, early noughties. And I remember, I've only ever seen it once, but there's a character in that movie whose favorite thing to do is to cook a chicken and then just eat it with his hands, just eat the whole thing. And I was like, thing is, this is going to be a problem for Macca because he's vegetarian, but what I wanted to do is kind of do a version of that, maybe with a few more bits, where I just like buy these amazing little chickens and just cover them in butter and white wine and tarragon and just keep it really earthy and simple. Like maybe just roast some potatoes in like duck fat or goose fat and make a really rich gravy with port and Marmite, like really dark, rich gravy. And I know chicken gravy is meant to be light, but I'd go dark on this one. And then we'd all just sit outside in the sun and just talk about music and just get our hands in the food and just be covered in food and our ears covered in music and just be chatting. That would do me. I'll be quite happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. That sounds quite a bit of the Gordon Ramsay about it.
It's on paper,
that sounds amazing. Paul McCartney can have like a wee slab of tofu or something. He can.
I'd sort Macca out. I'd figure something out. Yeah, close to, like you say, tofu. I'd get some Linda McCartney sausages in. I think he'd appreciate that.
Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you tonight, getting to know you a bit and getting to know the story of Battle and where it's going to go. But I just before we go, obviously, just as Ross and Dave done earlier, just give us a wee sell of the gig on the 8th of May.
Yeah, no, of course, my pleasure. So Battle, along with the Mardous and Dustin's Bar Mitzvah, we're playing the Water Rats on Friday, the 8th of May. We haven't played in nigh on 20 years, so we don't really know what's going to happen. But what I can guarantee is it's going to be probably one of the most passionate things you'll see, because it's going to be a group of people who have at various times shared stages together in the past when music was in a very different place. And I think our aim is to bring back some of that intensity and like vitality just for that one night. And if it is only for one night, so be it. But I think it could, with your support, it could lead on to other things. So hope to see as many of you there as possible. It's only a small venue. It's like 200 capacity. So with any luck, it will sell out, which would be a shame if some of you who could be there don't make it, but all the more reason to maybe book another show. So yeah, Friday the 8th of May at the Water Rats, Battle with Dustin's Bar Mitzvah and the Mardous, and it should be a pretty blinding night.
There you go. You couldn't have said it better, man. That's absolutely amazing. All the best, Jason. I'll be making sure that I come and see you, because there's going to be plenty more Battle gigs to come, so I'll catch you in the near future. But absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate your time, man, and amazing questions. Amazing to be asked. Thank you.
Cheers. Cool.
Have a great evening. See you, man. Bye-bye.
Thanks again for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, please contact me on the email timeforheroespod@gmail.com, or you can get me on Instagram at timeforheroespodcast. Thanks very much. We'll be back soon with another episode.